Let's begin. But first, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth. Jason Mercer was the kind of man who drew attention without even trying. Charismatic, impeccably dressed, and always perfectly composed, he moved through elite social circles with the ease of someone born to power. Beside him stood Isabella Mercer, his radiant, pregnant wife, whose elegance complemented his charm. Together, they were the picture of perfection, a couple admired by colleagues, envied by peers, and idolized on social media. Every gala, every charity event, every photo op seemed to capture happiness, success, and love, the kind of life many dreamed of but few ever achieved. On the surface, nothing appeared amiss. Their public smiles were flawless, their interactions polished and graceful. But behind closed doors, Isabella had begun to notice subtle shifts that made her heart tighten. Jason, once attentive and warm, seemed distant, often lost in thought or distracted by his phone. Evenings that were meant for family time turned into late nights at the office, or worse, unaccounted absences. Calls went unanswered, messages left unseen. At first, she tried to rationalize it: work stress, fatigue, or the pressures of hosting a high-profile life. Yet the unease refused to leave her. There were whispers, faint and disquieting, that suggested Jason's heart and attention were no longer solely hers. A colleague's glance lingered too long, a friend's cautious question hinted at secrets she wasn't meant to hear. Her intuition, sharpened by months of subtle inconsistencies, began to gnaw at her confidence. The life she had once cherished, the life that seemed perfect, started to feel like a carefully constructed illusion. Every smile from Jason now carried a hint of calculation, every embrace felt slightly mechanical. Isabella's mind raced as she tried to reconcile the man she loved with the stranger she was beginning to perceive. Then, one evening, she returned home earlier than expected, hoping to surprise Jason with a small dinner. As she entered the grand Mercer estate, a wave of dread washed over her. Something was different. The laughter she heard, the muffled voices, the unmistakable feeling that her life as she knew it was about to change, it all hit her at once. Her pulse quickened, her breaths came shallow, and a single thought crystallized with chilling clarity: tonight, everything would shatter, and nothing in her life would ever be the same again. Victoria Lane entered Jason Mercer's world like a storm wrapped in silk and diamonds. She was impossibly glamorous, her presence commanding attention without effort. Every gesture, every smile, every tilt of her head seemed calculated to captivate. But beneath the charm was ambition, sharp and unrelenting. Victoria knew exactly what she wanted and how to get it, and Jason, already intoxicated by power and self-admiration, was the perfect target. Where others might see arrogance, she saw opportunity. Where others might see a devoted husband, she saw vulnerability, a man whose attention could be subtly redirected toward indulgence and excitement. From the moment they met at a private charity gala, she played her role perfectly. Her compliments were measured, never excessive, her laughter soft but suggestive. She asked just enough questions to make Jason feel understood, yet always left a spark of mystery hanging between them. He found himself leaning in, captivated not only by her beauty but by the thrill of attention that flattered his ego in ways Isabella had never needed to. In Victoria's eyes, Jason's accomplishments were impressive, but his obedience to routine and domesticity seemed tedious. She suggested, softly and often, that he deserved freedom from responsibility, from monotony, and, most pointedly, from the limitations imposed by his pregnant wife. Victoria's presence quickly shifted the balance in Jason and Isabella's marriage. Jason, who had been distant, now found excuses to spend more time with Victoria. He laughed more easily, relaxed in ways he never had at home, and began dismissing Isabella's needs as interruptions. Every comment Victoria made, every whispered suggestion, chipped away at the foundation of loyalty and love Isabella had built. Where Isabella saw joy in their growing family, Victoria saw inconvenience, a burden that prevented Jason from fully enjoying life. As weeks passed, Isabella began to feel the isolating effects of Victoria's influence. Calls were unanswered, conversations became curt, and the warm intimacy they once shared withered. She noticed the subtle glances Jason gave when Victoria was mentioned, the unspoken excitement that he no longer reserved for her. Every missed dinner, every empty seat at the table, every unexplained absence deepened the growing distance. Isabella's heart ached, not just for her husband's attention, but for the life she thought they were building together. Victoria's intrusion wasn't just physical, it was emotional, a slow invasion that left Isabella feeling unseen, unvalued, and increasingly alone, as the shadow of betrayal loomed ever closer. Isabella Mercer had always trusted Jason, believed in his words, and treasured the life they had built together. But in recent months, the certainty she once felt had begun to erode, replaced by an uncomfortable tension she could no longer ignore. She noticed the small things first, his lingering phone calls, hushed conversations he stepped away to take, the faint scent of perfume on his suits that wasn't hers. At first, she tried to dismiss her concerns as paranoia, convincing herself that wealth and power brought constant attention and unnecessary complications. Yet the unease refused to fade. Jason's behavior had shifted subtly but unmistakably. Evenings meant for shared meals and quiet conversations had become solo affairs for Isabella, while he disappeared into meetings that never seemed to end. He returned home late, distracted, and often evasive when she asked simple questions. There was a polite charm in his words, a practiced smile that once warmed her heart, but it now carried an undertone of impatience and disinterest. The more she tried to connect, the more distant he seemed, as if a barrier had been erected between them, one she could not scale. Victoria's manipulations, subtle and insidious, played a critical role in widening that divide. She never forced Jason to act, nor did she overtly interfere in his marriage. Instead, she whispered doubts and observations that made his own ego swell, framing obligations and loyalty as burdens. "You work too hard," she would murmur during private lunches. "Don't you deserve a life that excites you?" Victoria's words were carefully chosen, designed to make Jason feel entitled to distraction and indulgence, to slowly diminish the emotional gravity of his promises to Isabella. Over time, these small nudges emboldened his arrogance, feeding the part of him that believed desire and novelty outweighed commitment and responsibility. Isabella felt the effects acutely. Every unanswered message and missed call deepened her anxiety. Each absence, each unexplained night, chipped away at the trust and security she had once taken for granted. Nights spent alone were filled with swirling thoughts, alternating between fear for the stability of her family and heartbreak over the growing emotional distance. She questioned whether she had misread the signs or whether the man she loved had fundamentally changed. Caught between loyalty and self-respect, Isabella's mind became a battlefield. She wanted to protect the life she was creating for her unborn child, yet she could not ignore the subtle erosion of respect and affection that defined her marriage now. Every smile from Jason that no longer carried warmth, every conversation that felt rehearsed or distant, forced her to weigh whether staying silent was an act of love or a surrender of her own dignity. The cracks in her marriage, once invisible to the outside world, were widening daily, leaving Isabella to confront the painful reality. The life she thought was perfect might already be unraveling, and she was powerless to stop it, unless she chose to act. Isabella had planned to return home early that evening, craving the comfort of her familiar surroundings and hoping to surprise Jason with a small dinner she had prepared. The air was crisp as she parked her car and walked up the steps of the Mercer estate, her mind still buzzing with anticipation and the subtle anxiety that had been gnawing at her for weeks. She carried herself with quiet grace, unaware that the moment she opened the front door would redefine everything she thought she knew about her marriage. As the door swung open, the first thing she noticed was the muffled laughter echoing from the study. Her steps slowed, instincts prickling, a strange sense of foreboding washing over her. She paused at the threshold and her eyes swept across the room. There, in the soft glow of the chandelier, Jason Mercer, the man she loved, the father of her unborn child, sat uncomfortably close to Victoria Lane. The distance between them was gone, replaced by familiarity that went beyond friendly companionship. Victoria's hand rested lightly on Jason's arm, her smile intimate, teasing, deliberate. Jason's expression, once warm and protective toward Isabella, was relaxed, indulgent, and completely unguarded, as though he had forgotten the existence of the woman standing silently in the doorway. Shock struck Isabella first. Her pulse raced, her stomach churned, but no sound escaped her lips. She had no words for the betrayal, no immediate reaction to express the storm inside her. Her eyes, wide and unwavering, absorbed every detail, the closeness, the laughter, the way Jason's hand brushed Victoria's in a gesture meant to be hidden from the world. For a suspended moment, the room seemed to freeze around her, and silence became her only response. Jason and Victoria noticed her too late. Their conversation faltered, smiles turning sharp as realization dawned. They were caught off guard, unprepared for her presence, stunned by the calm intensity radiating from her. Isabella's silence was louder than any accusation. Every second she lingered in that doorway sent a message more potent than confrontation. She had seen everything, understood everything, and yet she refused to give them the satisfaction of a reaction. Without uttering a single word, Isabella turned and walked away, her steps deliberate, controlled, and composed. Shock and panic replaced the arrogance that had filled the room moments before. Jason opened his mouth, but no words could capture the guilt and fear that now filled him. Victoria's eyes widened, a mixture of anger and disbelief flashing across her face. Isabella's composure remained unshaken as she disappeared from sight, leaving behind a silence heavy with unspoken judgment and a realization that the life they had taken for granted was no longer theirs to control. Isabella's footsteps were soft, almost deliberate, as she moved away from the study. The echoes of her husband and Victoria's stunned reactions lingered behind her, but she did not look back. She did not speak. Every fiber of her being was focused on maintaining control, on protecting the last shred of dignity she had left in a world that had betrayed her. Her silence was not weakness, it was a statement, a quiet declaration that she would not be drawn into chaos or anger, not here, not now. Inside the study, Jason's initial shock gave way to panic. He scrambled to form words, excuses, apologies, anything that could salvage the moment, but Isabella was already gone. His gaze followed her retreating figure, helpless and frantic, realizing with growing dread that the woman he had taken for granted was not only aware of his betrayal but had chosen to remove herself from it entirely. He had underestimated her composure, her intelligence, and her strength. Every second that passed without confrontation only intensified his anxiety, leaving him exposed in a way he had never experienced before. Victoria, on the other hand, was consumed by fury. Her carefully constructed image of control and influence was unraveling before her eyes. She had expected shock, maybe tears, or a dramatic confrontation, but never this quiet, deliberate withdrawal. Isabella's refusal to react on cue made Victoria feel powerless, and that powerless feeling was foreign, unwelcome, and deeply infuriating. Every calculated smile she had used to manipulate Jason and assert dominance seemed hollow in the wake of Isabella's calm retreat. Outside, Isabella took a deep breath, feeling the cool air against her skin. The world seemed to pause, granting her a brief moment of clarity. She knew the life she had relied on was gone, that the man she loved had chosen another, and that the comfort of luxury no longer guaranteed safety or respect. But she also knew she still had herself, and she had a life growing inside her that depended on her resilience. Every decision she made from this moment on would be deliberate, grounded in protecting her child and reclaiming her independence. Her mind raced as she considered the steps ahead, finding secure accommodation, enlisting trustworthy allies, ensuring financial stability, and preparing for the social fallout that would inevitably follow. Yet, even as she mapped out logistics, her focus remained on her emotional equilibrium, refusing to be defined by betrayal or despair. In her silence, in her quiet walk away, Isabella had taken the first step toward reclaiming power. The foreshadowing was clear, this departure was not an end, but a beginning. Every subsequent action would be measured, calculated, and unstoppable. Isabella Mercer had walked away that night not only from her husband and his mistress, but from the illusion of a life she would never allow to define her again, setting the stage for the reckoning that loomed ever closer. Isabella stepped into a world that felt unfamiliar yet liberating, where every decision rested squarely on her own shoulders. She navigated practical challenges with careful precision, finding temporary accommodation that was safe and discreet, managing finances she had never needed to handle alone, and arranging appointments for medical checkups to monitor her pregnancy. Each step demanded focus and patience, yet every small success bolstered her confidence. The pregnancy, once a shared joy, now carried additional weight. She had to remain vigilant not only for herself but for the life growing inside her. Every risk, every misstep, felt magnified, and the stakes were higher than ever before. Yet Isabella was not entirely alone. Small acts of assistance came in unexpected forms. A neighbor offered quiet support, leaving groceries at her door without knocking. A longtime friend sent messages with advice and reassurance. Even distant family members reached out discreetly, providing resources and guidance she could draw upon without revealing her location. These gestures, though subtle, reminded her that while betrayal had stripped away the false security of her previous life, the world still contained allies who respected and valued her. Her inner monologue became a fortress, a place where she could steel herself against fear and despair. She reminded herself of her own strength, of the resilience that had carried her this far. Each thought reinforced her determination to protect her unborn child and to never allow Jason's arrogance or Victoria's manipulation to dictate her life again. Memories of late nights spent comforting her child, of planning future milestones, and of her own personal goals all mingled with the sharp sting of betrayal, creating a focused clarity that drove her forward. Meanwhile, Jason began to feel the absence of Isabella in ways that unsettled him deeply. Meetings that had once been routine now felt hollow, social appearances carried a weight he could not shake. Colleagues noticed his distracted demeanor, and the media began to speculate on the sudden disappearance of the seemingly perfect couple. Each glance in a mirror, each unanswered message from his wife, reminded him that control, both over his personal life and his carefully curated public image, was slipping. As tension mounted, Isabella continued her careful navigation of independence. Every choice was deliberate, every interaction calculated to maintain discretion while building stability. She grew stronger with each passing day, her confidence blossoming alongside the child she carried. Meanwhile, Jason's panic, anxiety, and guilt intensified, setting the stage for an inevitable confrontation where the consequences of betrayal would no longer be avoidable. Isabella's journey of survival was far from easy, but it was shaping her into someone unyielding, someone who refused to be silenced or subdued. Jason Mercer paced his penthouse suite like a man possessed, every polished surface reflecting the growing chaos in his mind. He had spent weeks cultivating a life that appeared flawless, where control over business, image, and personal relationships was absolute. But now, Isabella's absence had shattered that illusion. Calls went unanswered, messages left unread, and every attempt to reach her was met with silence. The excuses he rehearsed in his mind, late meetings, traffic, misunderstandings, felt hollow and inadequate. Panic crept in, twisting in his stomach like a live thing. Victoria, who had once basked in the thrill of shared secrecy and control, suddenly grew distant, her demeanor shifting with subtle but unmistakable caution. Her laughter, previously light and teasing, became clipped, her smiles measured. She no longer leaned into his arrogance, no longer fed his ego without calculating the risks. The carefully constructed narrative of dominance and indulgence was unraveling before her eyes, and she was beginning to consider self-preservation over loyalty to him. Her attention, once fixed solely on pleasure and influence, now flickered with suspicion and unease, signaling that the fallout was larger than either of them had anticipated. As the hours stretched into an anxious night, Jason felt the first true pangs of guilt. He had believed in his own cleverness, in his ability to compartmentalize betrayal and remain untouchable. Yet, the emptiness of Isabella's silence struck harder than any confrontation could have. Every quiet second without her presence was a reminder of what he had jeopardized, the trust of the woman he claimed to love, the well-being of their unborn child, and the image he had so carefully curated in the public eye. The weight of responsibility, and of exposure, pressed down on him like a physical force. The consequences began creeping in subtly at first. Colleagues noticed his distracted demeanor, board members hesitated in their responses, and whispers from social circles reached him with increasing frequency. Invitations to events were postponed or canceled. Friends who once flattered him now exchanged glances that hinted at knowledge or doubt. The media, sensing a story behind the perfect life, started asking questions about the couple's sudden absence from public appearances. Each new development compounded his fear, forcing him to confront an unshakable truth: control was slipping from his grasp, and wealth alone could not shield him from the personal and social repercussions of betrayal. Jason Mercer, the untouchable billionaire, was learning the terrifying fragility of the world he thought he ruled. Amid the turmoil and uncertainty that had become Isabella Mercer's new reality, a quiet ally emerged, someone who moved with discretion but possessed the resources and knowledge to make a real difference. Elena Grant, a longtime family friend and trusted attorney, had noticed Isabella's absence long before it became a subject of gossip. She had been aware of the subtle cracks in the Mercer marriage, the late nights, the unexplained absences, the tension that had once seemed invisible to outsiders. Elena's loyalty was unwavering, her approach measured and strategic. She reached out to Isabella not with judgment, but with solutions, offering both safety and guidance for the complex web of social, legal, and financial challenges that awaited her. Through Elena's counsel, Isabella began to secure her independence. Safe accommodations were arranged quietly, far from prying eyes, allowing her to rest and recover without intrusion. Legal measures were put in place to protect her and her unborn child, from restraining orders to control over joint assets. Financial accounts were organized under her name, giving her autonomy and security she had never needed to consider before. Each document signed, each precaution implemented, reinforced the sense of control Isabella had reclaimed after weeks of feeling powerless. Elena's calm, confident presence acted as both shield and guide, providing practical assistance while nurturing Isabella's growing resilience and strategic thinking. Meanwhile, Victoria remained blissfully unaware that the ground beneath her carefully constructed life was beginning to shift. Her arrogance continued unchecked. She flaunted her influence over Jason, believing that Isabella's departure was temporary and inconsequential. She did not perceive the subtle moves being made behind the scenes, the legal and social safeguards that would soon render her manipulations ineffective. Her overconfidence blinded her to the possibility that Isabella was not only surviving but quietly building the foundation for a reckoning that could not be ignored. The tension between preparation and ignorance created a palpable undercurrent of suspense. Every step Isabella took, every decision guided by Elena's expertise, foreshadowed a moment of exposure when her absence, her strength, and her agency would confront Jason and Victoria in ways neither expected. Isabella's quiet empowerment contrasted sharply with Jason's panic and Victoria's arrogance, setting the stage for inevitable consequences. In the shadows of betrayal, she was no longer a passive victim, she was a force preparing to reclaim her life and assert justice on her own terms, patiently waiting for the moment when the illusions of power and control would finally shatter. Weeks of quiet planning and careful maneuvering culminated in a single, inevitable moment that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. Isabella Mercer's absence, once merely noticed as unusual, became impossible to ignore. Invitations went unanswered, social appearances missed, and whispers began circulating among friends, colleagues, and the media. Each passing day magnified the shock of her disappearance, and it was not long before the trail of evidence, subtly assembled under Elena Grant's guidance, began pointing directly toward Jason Mercer's betrayal. The illusion of a perfect life unraveled with terrifying speed. When Isabella finally made her presence known publicly, the effect was immediate and devastating. Jason, once untouchable and confident, was confronted with the undeniable proof of his own arrogance and betrayal. Friends, colleagues, and the media alike scrutinized his every word, every action, and every failure to uphold the vows he had made. The same charm and composure that had previously shielded him now amplified his humiliation, exposing his lack of accountability. Isabella's methodical approach ensured that the world saw him not as a victim of circumstance, but as a man whose choices had consequences. Victoria Lane, who had once manipulated and flaunted her position with near-total impunity, found herself blindsided by the repercussions. Her social standing crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny. Invitations were rescinded, professional connections severed, and whispers of her duplicity circulated through the very circles she had once dominated. The arrogance that had carried her through months of indulgence now became the source of her isolation. As Isabella's story emerged, Victoria was left with nothing but her ego bruised and her ambitions thwarted. Amid the chaos, Isabella stood as a pillar of strength and dignity. She did not revel in vengeance or humiliation. Her actions were measured, deliberate, and focused on justice and protection for herself and her unborn child. She asserted control over the narrative, revealing enough to hold Jason accountable while maintaining the moral high ground. Every legal safeguard, every strategic disclosure, reinforced her authority and independence. Friends and supporters rallied around her, drawn not by sympathy alone, but by respect for her courage and composure. The emotional climax was undeniable. Jason's realization of his mistakes was raw and undeniable. The arrogance that had once defined him now seemed fragile and foolish. Victoria's humiliation served as a stark reminder that manipulation and entitlement carried risks, and that deceit rarely remains hidden. Isabella, in contrast, emerged empowered and resolute, having navigated betrayal with intelligence, strength, and grace. The moral reckoning was complete, justice had been served, and the lives of those who had sought to harm her were forever changed. In asserting control over her life and her story, Isabella proved that dignity, resilience, and moral clarity can triumph over greed, arrogance, and betrayal. Isabella Mercer emerged from the storm of betrayal with a quiet strength that few could have anticipated. The life she once knew, filled with opulence and false security, had been stripped away, leaving her to forge a path entirely her own. She focused first on the tangible, creating a safe, comfortable home for herself and her unborn child, surrounding herself with stability and warmth that had been missing for months. Every piece of furniture, every room, every detail became a reflection of the life she was determined to build, one founded on independence, safety, and dignity rather than wealth or appearances. Emotionally, Isabella worked tirelessly to reclaim herself. She allowed herself to grieve for the betrayal she had endured, but she refused to let anger or resentment define her. Meditation, quiet walks, and time spent with trusted friends helped her heal the invisible wounds left by Jason and Victoria's deception. The pregnancy that had once felt like a source of tension now became her anchor, reminding her of purpose, hope, and the continuity of life. With every passing day, her confidence and resilience grew, shaping a woman who was no longer defined by her husband's choices, but by her own courage and decisiveness. Socially, Isabella navigated the world with renewed agency. She reconnected with friends and allies who respected her autonomy, and she began establishing her presence independently, stepping into roles and environments that had previously been inaccessible or overshadowed by Jason's prominence. Her story inspired admiration and sympathy, but it was her composed, assertive demeanor that earned genuine respect. Isabella's ability to transform betrayal into empowerment became a testament to her character and a warning to those who underestimated her. Meanwhile, Jason faced the consequences of his actions. The public, having witnessed the unraveling of his personal life, judged him harshly, and professional partners distanced themselves from his influence. He was left to contend with regret, humiliation, and the realization that charm, wealth, and control could not shield him from the outcomes of his arrogance. In the quiet aftermath, Isabella held her newborn close, marveling at the life she had protected and nurtured. The trials she endured had shaped her into a stronger, wiser woman. With hope in her heart and clarity in her mind, she looked forward to a future defined by self-respect, resilience, and the unshakable bond with her child. The story closed not with despair, but with empowerment, closure, and the undeniable strength of a mother reclaiming her life. Months had passed since the events that had upended Isabella Mercer's life, yet the memory of betrayal had transformed into quiet strength. She walked confidently through parks and city streets, her newborn cradled gently in her arms, a symbol of the life she had fought to protect and the resilience she had cultivated. Every step she took radiated independence, dignity, and a calm assurance that could not be shaken by wealth, arrogance, or manipulation. Jason Mercer and Victoria Lane lived with the weight of their choices. Professional setbacks, social scrutiny, and personal regret became constant reminders of their misdeeds. No charm, influence, or money could erase the consequences they now faced. Isabella's journey stood as proof that true strength is earned, not given, and dignity cannot be stolen. Justice had been served, not through vengeance, but through courage, intelligence, and unwavering self-respect. In the end, empowerment prevailed, and a mother's quiet triumph illuminated a future full of hope. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to The Broken Truth.